Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our roundtable this morning. The Agile PM Roundtable is a collaboration between people from Agile PDX and the Portland PMI chapter that brings together project managers and Scrum Masters and other Agilists to talk about and share and learn how Agile principles and practices can be applied to the work that people do at all levels of an organization. Our roundtable seeks to build connections between the Agile and project management communities, and we strive to create an inclusive environment for people with curious and open minds. Through our partnership with Agile PDX, we're able to provide this video conferencing service and a platform to reach out to the Agile community in the Portland area and beyond. And all of that is made possible by the Agile PDX community and their sponsors, including their platinum sponsor, ProFocus Technologies. So thank you, Agile PDX, and thank you, ProFocus, for your continued support of this forum and of Agile PDX in general. You can learn more about the sponsors of Agile PDX at their website, agilepdx.org/sponsorship. Now, for those of you who hold credentials that require continuing education credits, Agile PDX offers a tool that supports the auditing of professional development units, PDUs, to PMI, and Scrum educational units, SEUs, to the Scrum Alliance. I'll post a URL here shortly, and please visit that URL in the next 24 hours. And volunteers from Agile PDX will report your participation to the certification granting organization for auditing purposes. You'll still need to claim your individual continuing education units, but Agile PDX will report that you attended today for auditing purposes. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Adam Light, and I want to turn it over to Brian, my co-host, to introduce Adam and his topic.
All right, thank you, David. We're breaking it up so that you won't get too tired of hearing one voice today, so keep you awake. So at today's Agile PM Roundtable, we're very pleased to welcome a very special guest, Adam Light. As a seasoned project manager and business leader, Adam thrives on overcoming obstacles to deliver meaningful outcomes. With a deep background in software development and delivery, he has specialized in technology-led business transformations for more than 15 years. As a solutions manager for grid products at Portland General Electric, Adam's applying smart grid technology to balance supply and demand for renewable energy, creating infrastructure for electrical vehicles, and to help cut Oregon's carbon emissions. Today, Adam's going to share with us some thoughts on the art and science of managing dependencies. We'll set the stage with about a 20-25 minute presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A within the group. So please note that there are a number of us on the call, and we request that you ask your questions through the Zoom chat. It's at the bottom of the Zoom bar, usually at the bottom of the Zoom bar. I will monitor, or David will monitor the chat and call on you to ask the questions. When you do that, please unmute your microphone to indicate you'd like to participate in the discussion. We've used a similar format with guests in the past, and it's worked pretty well. But there's always room to learn more, so please bear with us as we inspect and adapt and overcome any obstacles. We're going to record Adam's sessions today with his permission and your permission, obviously. So we will be making that recording available and confirm to registrants in the general community via the Agile PDX Slack and YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find them there. We plan on recording the entire session, including the Q&A. So if you have any concerns, again, please feel free to use the chat during the session, discuss those with myself or David. And you can also follow up with us after the session today. After the discussion with Adam, we're going to set aside a couple of minutes, probably around a little before 8 o'clock for any announcements that people might have. And then we'll break shortly before 8 so that we can transition to whatever comes up next in our day. With that, go ahead and turn it over to Adam and turn the presentation over to him.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I don't think we'll have. Oh, and you gotta.
I was gonna say, let's see here. Call participants. Go for it.
All right.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Looks great.
All right. Great. Oh, yeah. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been a while since I've presented in this forum. I think I have a couple of years ago. I think at the time it was in person, so that's how long ago it was. Seems like a long time anyway. As Brian said, I have been doing Agile and project management for a long time. For about 11 years, I had my own, I supported myself and my family with my own business called Sotec. And so I've worked with a lot of different companies, helping them solve problems and kind of transform themselves to become more effective using Agile methods. So it's a mixture of IT type companies, maybe 65% IT companies and 35% sort of software product companies. So I've seen a lot of different things. And as Brian mentioned, I now work for PGE, the power company, probably maybe your power company, depending where you live in Portland. And what I'm doing there is helping develop what we call flexible load. So in the old days, 130 years ago, between 130 years ago and 10 or 15 years ago, power was kind of a one-way street. You would generate the power at a big power station. It could be a coal-fired power plant. It could be the hydropower or something like a Bonneville Dam. And then that huge source of power would flow out to places where it's used. So it might be an industrial site close to the main line, or it might be your house. So it's kind of a one-way flow. And now with the drive to renewable energy, that's different. So seeing like sometimes it's windy, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's not. So if you're using renewable energy sources, you have distributed, in some cases, the energy generation, and then it fluctuates a lot. So there's a lot of, there's an aspect and need for balancing supply and demand. In fact, one of the biggest things that we need to do in order to accelerate transition to renewable energy is to balance that supply and demand and figure out effective ways to do it. So that's the types of problems that I work on now, is helping the power company kind of help its customers participate in storing energy usage or shifting energy usage to different times of the day to enable that flexible load potential that we need to reach the goals of carbon-free energy production. So I'm going to just go through a few slides today, and then I think the discussion is always the best part, so I'm going to leave lots of time for that. Let's see how this works. So probably everybody has heard of and used and thought about something called the critical path. So the idea of the critical path, it's the proverbial long pole in the tent. If you have something, if you think of this tent, I think this is where it came from, it's like an Arab looking tent, and you've got all these poles holding it up. The one that is going to govern, how tall the tent is the longest one. And so that's the same concept of the critical path, is how can we find what the longest path through the project is if we adjust for everything else and make things as parallel as possible. This has been, this concept was put into practice for different uses, and this is like a construction example, but basically it's been sort of turned into math. So this is really just representing the project as a kind of a directed graph, and then once you do that, you can apply all kinds of what are now pretty routine methods to kind of solve that mathematical problem or generate scenarios or whatever you want to do. So that's kind of the thing that tools like Microsoft Project have traditionally helped people do. This critical path method was really generated or devised for construction type activities. So when people started doing really big things, kind of in the 20th century around civil public works and military projects and stuff like that, the critical path was employed, because you can imagine if you're a project manager on something like this and you make a mistake, you could have 50 cement trucks that you didn't need or couldn't use, or you could have like 500 men standing around getting into trouble and getting paid and not have any work to do. So there's lots of reasons why critical path scheduling is valuable or has been valuable. But when you don't know that pathway in advance, like you don't know exactly, you're kind of on a journey and you don't know exactly where you're going to end up. You kind of know the general direction or the outcomes that you want to achieve. Then the critical path is not always so useful to you as a project manager. So the agile response to project management has been break things down, make the features independent so you can deliver them in any order, and then deliver them, get feedback, and always be producing something. So at some stage, some way of looking at things, you're always done. You don't really have an end or a time where you can say that you weren't done. You basically get done relatively early in the project, and then you just keep adding to the product that you're building. So kind of a different paradigm with Agile. And a lot of people conflate the critical path method with dependencies. But when you have done a lot of separation of the different work elements and you're doing a lot of things in parallel, the sort of activity relationships are not obviously the dependencies that you want to be or need to be paying attention to. I don't know if anybody around here has worked in an organization where they try to do safe big room planning, but one criticism that people make about safe is that kind of inadvertently elevates dependencies, basically, rather than trying to reduce and eliminate dependencies. It sort of makes a big important job of all these people with big important titles to manage the dependency, and so they create this sort of morass to kind of justify their importance. I'm not saying that's what I think. I'm just saying that that's a criticism that's often made. So what this picture is showing is that this guy is, the different rows across the blue tape are different teams, and the columns are different sprints that are all aligned. And the red string or yarn is kind of saying this work item, post-it note, is dependent on this other work item. So people are trying to figure out dependencies. So then that leads us kind of to the type of dependency I think it's going to be most productive for us to talk about, or the way of looking at dependencies I think is going to be most productive for us to talk about today. So I'm just going to ask you to sort of puzzle over this for a minute and pick it in. I'm not going to read it to you. And look at these different types of dependencies, A, B, C, D, and see if you can match them to the examples on the right, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you don't, it's not obvious what the dependency types are, maybe I'll just kind of go over that. So a discretionary dependency is one that is sort of a nice to have. It would be nice if this other thing was done before we had to start, make our job easier. A mandatory dependency would be one that is not optional, kind of the opposite of discretionary. An internal dependency would be more like those activity relationships, like two stories or tasks within our project or frame or whatever that we where we have control or influence over both of them. And then an external dependency would be a dependency where something that we're doing or we need to do depends on something that somebody else is doing. So just take a minute to see what you think of that, and then tell me, so you kind of speak up, which things on the right go with which things on the left. Anyone?
I'll start. I'll put it out there and see how wrong I am. I put a discretionary dependency as number 2, applying the final coat of paint and removing the masking tape.
Okay. Yeah. And what anybody else think of that? Anybody have a different answer?
So I guess the theory there is that applying the coat and masking, removing the tape is discretionary. You can't do without it. Versus a mandatory would be you can't sail unless the hull is sealed.
Yeah,
Is
for
that?
sure. I think a mandatory is definitely 4, because you wouldn't want to, have cracks in the hull of your boat when you launched it. For me, the discretionary one that I had in mind was actually number 3, finalize design reviews and begin coding. So the reason I say that is you can start coding. You might need to change what you did. You might need to throw it away, but there's nothing that prevents you from starting. It's kind of it's a discretionary in that sense. And I think the reason that I wanted to put that discretionary in there is that sometimes when we look at dependencies, what's valuable is to kind of flex our mind a little bit and say, well, is that really a dependency, or how is that really a dependency? So I think that's what's useful in looking at that particular example for number 3 for me.
That was debating between those two, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, and I can now see what you're saying, Adam. Yeah. You don't need to wait for the design reviews to start coding.
Yeah. It's a nice to have, or it's a choice, or it's a convention, or a policy that we have. For me, the number 2, the apply final coat of paint and remove masking tape, was an example of an internal dependency, because that's something that both tasks are things that I need to do. If I'm presuming that you don't typically split those tasks. You don't have like the painter and the masker. Those are usually the same person. And then that leaves the last one, which is deliver lumber and start framing. And so you can imagine, if you think of a construction site, they come around with a truck at 5:30 in the morning and drop off all this stuff, and then the crew can get there at 6:30 and start working. If the truck breaks down, you're going to have a crew standing around waiting for the truck, and it's something that's outside of your control. If you're mostly you've got a separate supplier than you are the builder. Can people think of examples of these from their own projects? Something that's close to you, Vikram?
Yeah, maybe something like you need an external team to set up your servers and your dev environments and all that.
Yeah, for sure.
We had a mandatory dependency on a back-end service being available for our front-end team to develop their basically their user experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to look at the stories and determine which ones were. Going back to your chart of the safe diagram with all the dependencies, we actually had to do something similar to that to identify all those.
Yeah, you have a lot of teams working in parallel on the same product.
Yeah, without synchronizing their sprints. So,
Yeah.
And then obviously the external, we've had vendor deliveries that were either late or we were dependent on.
Mm-hmm. So kind of outsourcing relationship. What kind of internal dependencies are people challenged by?
Where would we put like architecture review board needs approval? It could be something similar to design reviews, discretionary.
Yeah.
I mean, basically all of our processes, and it's really interesting to think of those as dependencies, and internal ones that are sort of our own making. I'm looking at these 4 types, like, wow, I'd love to have the pie chart to know of all of our dependencies, how many are really kind of caused by us because it's the way we want to work versus this is imposed on us versus just it's the way it's got to be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another point is just kind of mentally, if you're looking at dependencies and you've identified them, kind of doing a mental exercise or some kind of group exercise to see, which of these are constraints of our own making, and what if we change the rules, basically? What if we change the policies that said, you don't have to wait to do the design review to start coding, but you have to flag that thing as out of phase or something like that. So you've gotten started on it, so everybody knows that it might be there might be some throwaway if you're working on a phase, but you're not doing nothing. I mean, these are some of the things that in Agile, I think where Agile has gotten to. You know, when I first started doing Agile, it was like, well, how do we do it? What's radically different from what we were doing before? But now it's a lot of things like that. Like, what are our agreements between the relationships? And, you know, we've agreed that we've run into problems in the past when we didn't wait for the story to be reviewed before we started. So we've got a policy that we don't do that. And now pretty soon, like, some people leave the team, some more people join the team, and suddenly it's a dependency. Like, there's not that choice of that sort of discretionary choice becomes becomes to seem undiscretionary because people kind of forget that it was something they created themselves, basically.
Does anybody have any discretionary dependencies examples? I'd be curious.
Yeah, can anybody think of discretionary dependencies in their own company or organization? All right. Well, let's go on. I don't have too many more things here. I wanted to. I think last time I came to this meeting, Gene did a whole session on interactivity and remote facilitation, among other things, but that was the main thing. And I think I like to do that kind of thing too. This is a different tool than one Gene used. This is called Poll Everywhere. So I wanted to go through these, and I'm going to ask you to vote. I think you can vote for more than one, and you can upvote as well. So these are kind of when I looked at dependencies, these are 5 things that kind of breaking down dependency management that you need to think about. So just understanding what dependencies are, and that's kind of what we were just talking about. Having a clear consensus within the team. If some people think that a dependency is a activity relationship and it's the project manager's job, or they think something else, whatever they might think, it's going to be hard to talk about dependencies. Usually you need to do some kind of structured activity to generate dependencies. It could be a planning activity that you do, or at least a brainstorming activity where you look at your plans or talk about your plans. And then you kind of need to be concrete and identify those dependencies. So you could do that with a ball of red yarn, or you could do it through your brainstorming activity, or kind of looking at a chart or whatever. And then to manage the dependencies, you need to have some kind of validation where you and the other party, whether it's someone in your team or someone out of your team, another team, that both parties understand that there's a dependency. Like, just having a dependency on somebody, if they don't know it's a dependency, that's not a very productive or rewarding. Identifying the dependency is not very productive or rewarding if you're not going to do anything about it, basically, or if you're not going to communicate and act on it. And then because everybody's work is always changing and they're always learning new things, then you need to keep up that communication. You need to be able to manage things. So yeah, people are starting to rank those. So good. So go in and put these in order, and we'll see how they shake out amongst you. If you can see at the top, that's the URL. You can go to it on your phone or whatever device you're using to attend this meeting.
Could someone post in the chat real quick and easily? I've got like full screen. I can't see it well.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's try it here. right?
Give just another minute. I've got one or two people that might not have answered yet, so let you finish up. Got a lot of number ones. Three-way tie right now. So this is interesting. The common understanding of what dependencies are, that kind of makes sense to me. That people, when I first time I did this poll or something like this, you know, that's what I observed, is that most people are like, yeah, I get what a dependency is. And so when you're teaching a class, for example, like spending a lot of time breaking, you know, kind of going into a lot of detail about how to identify dependencies is not very helpful for folks. And I think what's kind of a little bit surprising to me is the fifth ranked one, because that seems like something that requires a lot of effort, but maybe that's captured in the third one there, which is the continuous management. Like it's not something you do. Maybe you can see there's kind of two related. You know, it's not something you just do once to create that commitment. It's managing. And keeping on top of it. That's hard. So, but tell me, like, what do you see? What jumps out at you looking at this, and what does it make you think of?
One suspicion I have is for that one in the bottom, the validation piece, it's hard to do that without having done a lot of these other activities. So if these are problems, it's really hard to have the bottommost one. Yeah.
Basically, like people start out to do dependency management, and they kind of do the bottom two, and then they get stuck on the other ones eventually. Right. Yeah, that's a good insight. Very few people are like, I'm not even going to talk about dependencies. I'll just see what happens, you know. That doesn't get you very far. Within those top three, what challenges have you encountered, or are you encountering right now?
All of them. Yeah, I'd say, you know, right now I'm working on a project that would involve an integration between a couple of different systems, actually a few different systems, mm-hmm. and identifying what's possible. I think part of it is we've got something that's multifactorial, that there's no actual statement of scope. It's kind of this group or company-wide determination. How much value can this bring versus how much effort's involved versus what's actually possible, and trying to figure out kind of within that space where we actually want to land is involving, a fair bit of circular conversation.
Because you all have kind of a general goal, but not an agreed not like a shared outcome that everyone can envision. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. There's no predefined, like what you were talking about earlier, as far as being able to manage or sort of map dependencies.
Yeah.
This is a case where that's particularly challenging because we don't know what the end state is ultimately.
Yeah.
What we would want to go toward.
Yeah.
Agile,
I could say like I have a dependency on you, and you'd be like, that's not a dependency. We're not even doing that thing.
We're not exactly.
Yeah.
So, the Agile methodology is what we're gravitating towards. And, so this discussion is timely.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting case of, it strikes me as an interesting case of the sort of reverse situation that David was talking about at the beginning, where he was saying like, oh, I never thought about it, that all those dependencies are really just constraints that we've placed on ourselves. It sounds like in your case, it might be helpful to place some constraints so you could at least talk about what the dependencies are, basically.
Absolutely.
If you can't agree on what the outcome, you could at least agree on how you're going to decide if there's a dependency, or how you're going to align on which things are constant and not, maybe not everything's nailed down, but maybe not everything's totally up in the air either. How about somebody else? What other challenges are you seeing in this planning, identification, and continuous management?
I'll jump in on continuous management real quick. We have an extremely dynamic environment because our client tends to change their mind constantly. And so not only do plans change, but dependencies change because things get reprioritized on a regular basis. So we have to continually update, what the dependencies are and who owns them and how we're going to manage them.
So if you think of like that graph or Gantt chart at the beginning, if you change what thing you're going to do first, or what thing needs to be, like what defines, the next milestone, then everything's going to shift. And then you have to find a way to get back. You either have to know, you either have to have like a model of the dependencies so you can see how they all change, or you have to get everybody back together somehow to talk about whether they've changed or not, or even which ones the dependencies are, basically. So that kind of lends itself to the need to create and maintain a model like that, that maybe that safe example picture or something else where everybody can see what everybody else is doing, or at least those things that might be dependencies, what everybody else is working on, so that when something moves, they can notice if their thing has changed or become a dependency in relation to that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it in the chat. Somebody else? What other things are you noticing in the first read?
I'd like to explore what Brian mentioned about the relationship between dependencies and priorities, and local prioritization versus global prioritization. So I'm trying to, one of the things that we're talking about at my work is, boy, is there a better way to organize the people and the work so that there are fewer dependencies, and so that, a team or a subset of this, a smaller subset of the teams can prioritize the work in a way that makes sense to them, so that they can, be focused and know enough about what's coming next, but still meet the needs of the external consumers of their work.
Mhm.
What experiences do people have creating that balance between, like, here's all the work that we could ever do and all the work that's in progress, and coming up with the Gantt chart or the the red string chart, versus, okay, letting things play out a little bit more organically with a little
Mhm.
less centralized control.
So kind of how to the art of communicating or identifying like a workable number of dependencies that give things, that help people kind of navigate without getting, you don't want to be in the situation that Mike mentioned where like there's no dependencies because nobody knows anything about, and they're just bumping into each other all the time, versus an overly scripted thing where, to Brian's point, if like one thing changes, then you have to spend the whole morning redrawing the dependency chart, and that's happens every day. So how to find the middle ground in between. Has anybody a good solution where they feel like they've found balance in the number and degree of dependency management?
Or even prioritization.
I think some things that come to mind, this is Vikram, are like, to take my former example, in the past, the teams used to depend on a centralized team for setting up servers and infrastructure. So how can you push that capability back into the team themselves so they can be self-sufficient? I think we talked about this self-service, right? Also,
Yeah.
partially sometimes temporarily changing team construct so that a dependent person, if it's a dependencies around skill sets, then they are temporarily safaring or kind of co-locating with the team to get them going and helping them learn the thing that they're dependent about so that they can become self-sufficient.
Yeah, that makes me think of a couple of things. One is that dependencies are often they're not uniformly distributed, right? There's like everybody's dependent on the same thing or in the same area or the same team. And so then you can do different things in the kind of short run, long run. One thing, in the short run, you can say like that team is going to sort of have a very strict prioritization scheme and communicate every time something changes, because they know it's going to probably affect somebody, and have a very it could have a very specific intake process where you sort of can't make a plan until you register the dependency, and they kind of give a handshake and say that they got it. And then as people said, you can, in the long run, you can change that team, basically, and say like, if that's, you can either change that team or you can change the rules. So you can say like, well, actually, the code base is shared and anybody can work on integrations. We're going to have some problems with that, that we'll have to manage, but we can't just be all sitting around waiting for one team. That's not workable. Or you can, make that team bigger, or you can do something else to kind of change the nature of the game, to change the way the system works, so that you don't need kind of a central, architecture where you need so many integrations to a central API, or you can do something to make. A lot of times I've seen that type of pattern with an API team, where you have somebody that is the one team that's creating the service that everybody needs, or the services that everybody needs.
So yeah, there does seem to be this connection between dependencies and silos of knowledge or capability or access. So I wonder if the way to really, not so much about managing dependencies as eliminating dependencies, is by enabling other people to solve the problem themselves instead of having to go to someone else to solve the problem for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And for me, kind of a canonical example that springs to mind is, 10, 15 years ago, when someone on my team needed a new, a new box, we do a lot of things at my employer with a variety of different operating systems. So I need a very specific version of Linux from 6 years ago that we, stood up. It used to be, it's like, yeah, you had to go like file a ticket with IT, and they, had to re-image a box in the lab, and even sometimes acquire hardware and stuff. And now with everything being virtualized and like tools like Vagrant and Chef and all that kind of stuff, yep, someone still needs to maintain all that, the infrastructure. But now the, engineer, the test engineer that just needs a specific version of CentOS can poof just do it themselves. And it took a long time, and it had to require some very specific technology. But yeah, the nature of that dependency is completely different.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good example. I think there's lots of examples of that with cloud computing, for sure, that where we used to have dependencies on, we have like, we have to do this thing so we can tell people what our performance requirements are, because it's going to take them 6 weeks to build all the environments that we need to go to production. And now, you can literally decide the day before, and, or even in the moment, as you're in production and you start to see constraints, you can adjust those if you have a good architecture. What other things do people see that, where maybe looking in hindsight, we used to have a lot of dependencies and now we don't? We've shifted the bottleneck somewhere else.
Well, I think your cloud computing is a good example where, if I needed to create an environment or needed access to, Postgres database, it would have taken, weeks to get tickets in to do it. Now it's just, you go online, you spin it up, and within 10 minutes you're going, including all the authentication, storage, everything. And similar, I guess, just to get back a little bit earlier, we were talking a little bit about capacity planning. You can make a decision, within a few minutes, and everything gets spun up. And then if your whatever hits you get or your capacity needs to change, it's done automatically. You don't have to go and buy more hardware and install more capacity or more, more CPUs or more storage. It's just done automatically, and it goes down if you don't need it, not using it. So that's been a huge change in terms of dependencies on back office operations and data centers.
Do people have examples of dependencies that are, we already given some examples of this, but where a dependency or pattern of dependencies really identifies a larger architectural or organizational issue? Anybody think of an example of that?
We've had a shift for specific skill sets and specific knowledge around specific tools, because they've become more prevalent or more required because of a different model of cloud computing than we had before, more of a domain knowledge than we had before. So we've had to spin up and train more people in specific areas that, weren't really dependencies before.
Yep. Sometimes you sort of get in a situation where we can't find anybody with this skill set, and so then you can train those people internally rather than. So that kind of changes the game. Or conversely, if you can't find anybody with this skill set, maybe it's because that technology is so obscure that it's not really viable to keep using that technology, and identify the dependency, the continued dependency on that skill set. It identifies the need to not need that skill set, or to avoid that skill set, and avoid needing that skill set. Another example that I can think of from recently is so login. So basically every application, every program that people want to run requires being able to log in, so you know what the customer what customer features are available to that, what that customer situation is and what they can do and what they can't do and what their ID is and their address and stuff like that. And so, millions and millions of dollars to build a new website. Somehow nobody thought to solve that problem. so it's like, well, great, this is really great, but we're still back in the same situation. Like, how could that be? And to be honest, I think part of it is like not the problem. I think that it masks is that part of it is not wanting to let go, right? Like if I can log in and then go to any technology or any page that I set up, whether it's within our environment or somewhere else in the cloud or in some other system that I bought, if all I need is to be able to log in and there's an identity provider and then I'm off to the races, then suddenly the people that are the ones who were tasked with spending millions and millions of dollars to build a new website, new technology, are no longer in demand. They're no longer the gatekeepers of everything. Nobody cares what's on their backlog because they'll just go do it themselves, basically. So I think there's a certain need to be depended upon that is shown by that example. And it might not even be it might not even be acknowledged or known by the people that are exhibiting that behavior. Brian, how long do we usually leave? A few minutes at the end? What's our
we can wrap up here pretty quick. I think unless there are any other questions, then we usually save time at the end for announcements. I'm trying to mute myself. It's like I understand my fan is making a little noise here.
Well, Adam, are there any final concluding thoughts that you share with the group?
Any burning questions that people have that we didn't get to, or things that they've just now realized after sitting here for 45 minutes? What is the last parting words on dependencies?
Thank you, Adam, for the good talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful discussion and contributions.
I just, for me, I just took the takeaway of looking at these dependencies and kind of categorizing them, even if it's done just mentally, is something I'm going to take away and do. So I think I hadn't really thought about it in terms of, discretionary, mandatory, internal, external, and now that I'm thinking about it, I want to treat them differently and go back and prioritize and look at which ones really are discretionary and maybe start to eliminate some of those.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, agreed. That kind of framework's valuable.
Good.
Yeah, that and seeing the mapping process kind of visualized like that way. I saw some chatter about SAFe and whatnot, which I've not touched, but I think it does speak to your point about bottlenecks and in cases where you have groups that are drawn upon heavily within a project and how you can identify that. That's valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think anything like that, I think what people make fun of is that it's kind of taught as a art. It's like, you have to be like, oh, have you ever done like a big room facilitation? It's like anybody can draw connections between one thing and the other thing. It's a question of getting down. What are you going to do about it? Kind of thing.
Right. Like, how do you execute on that?
Yeah. It's not the art isn't like getting a bunch of people in the room and talking about and putting up yarn. The art is having less yarn, and it kind of gets in a situation of people are like, we had so much yarn that I had to use 2 skeins, It's like that's you're missing the point.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing that with us today. yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate everybody else who listened in and people that asked questions and lent their voice to what we're doing here. Before we break, I wanted to open up the floor for anybody who has announcements. I posted a couple of links in the chat to learn more about the upcoming events for Agile PDX and for Portland PMI. But the floor is open for anybody else that would like to share things that are coming up, things that are on the radar that we might be all be interested in.
Just real quickly, there, I want to mention that we do have a LinkedIn group if people are interested. And Jean wasn't able to participate today to a family, unfortunate family event, but she did mention I think it was a coding camp coming up, and I was going to see if I could get a link to that and put it out in our LinkedIn group. So,
what kind of camp?
It was some kind of a, I'm trying to remember now, a PM related coding camp. I'm not exactly sure, but what I'll do is I'll put it out I'll try to find it, put it out in our LinkedIn group, our Portland Agile Project Management group. See if I can.
Hey, Brian, what's the best way for people to find out about that community? So if I just posted the link to it, can people who aren't members see it? Is it open for?
Yeah, okay. Should be able to see it.
Excellent. I will do that here then. Okay. Well, excellent. Any other announcements people would like to share? Okay, if not, well, I think that's it for today. Thank you once again, Adam. Thank you once again for everybody who attended. We'll do this again in another month. Please look for us on Meetup. Until then, stay safe, everybody. Have a good time, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for the talk. It's great content.